Hi, I'm Jason at Shredmentor Rock Guitar Academy, and today I'm going to tell you a story in the hopes of persuading you to aspire to be more of a musician rather than just a guitar player, or a whatever instrument player for that matter. See, the difference is, music is really a language, and I don't even mean that like a metaphor. Yes, it's not a spoken language, but you're communicating something. And your instrument is really just one of many mechanical ways that we've discovered to harness this language. And in fact, we didn't even invent the language. Harmony is really something in nature. We just found it. If you've ever heard the wind whistling by your window on a windy night, vibrations like that just happen. We didn't invent it, we just figured out a way to harness it. So, as I said, I'm going to tell you a story, and for me this is really one of the most fascinating stories that I have heard. And I first discovered this in 2003. I was reading an article that came up in the news about an archaeological dig in southern Germany, and I'm going to graze through the details here. I'm going to actually provide some links to this stuff, so it's a great read. I recommend you do read it. It'll be in the description for this video. But on this archaeological dig, in a cave, they found fragments of a mammoth-ivory flute. And when they had an expert rebuild this flute, an exact replica but out of wood, and put the holes in the exact same places, what did they get but the minor pentatonic scale? It actually played something like your normal... Now, of course, we didn't have the tuning standards, that we now have today back then, so it would have been a rough approximation of that, but this was, at the time when I read it, they estimated that mammoth-ivory flute specifically to be 30 to 37,000 years old. However, this past year, well, no, 2012, really, last year now, I actually found new evidence about that in another article where actually they did other dating and they're actually thinking it's more like 42,000 years ago. Regardless, civilization started about 10,000 years ago. So that's the part that I find really fascinating, is that we've been rocking out on the pentatonic scale longer than we've been growing crops and longer than we've been governing cities and nations. And it really runs deep in our veins because it's something that we're just very, very perceptive of. It's very much a part of us, but yet at the same time, we didn't invent it. We did invent a system to help us understand and utilize it, though. And that we call music theory. That the way we can approximate that very primal rhythmic urge, that thing that stems from our heartbeat itself. That 1, 2, that our heartbeat just constantly does for as long as it works correctly. So basically, all of this time, we've been making music together. And in the very, very beginning, we had really nothing much different than the couple of different ways that we have to make musical sound before. In fact, we can actually count them. There's just a small handful. There are your wind-based sounds, which are probably what came first. Bird bones were frequently found around that same site, and they're hollow, which helps birds to fly and weigh a lot less. So very early on, just eating the birds that early people would have found, we would have actually, found one and hey, it whistles, guys. And now you got a whistle, and then you got to put a couple holes in it, and you got a flute, and we had plenty of time to work this stuff out. So that early part of just discovering music, it just had to take forever, I'm sure. We're living in a very, very fortunate time that we can just take for granted that 6, 7, 8-string guitars just exist. All this was once was a bow for archery that just had a little bit of a fundamental frequency to it, really. It had a note. An early solo would have been down, 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 down. That would have been your early music there on strings. So again, be thankful we live today. There are probably some bands that still sound like that, but so yeah, remember, we didn't make this happen though. We had wind causing things to vibrate, and we had strings vibrating. So really, we can narrow this down to just a couple different methods that we even ever have used to make music. With wind, we can just have wind cause the vibrations of the different sized space in which it's moving through. So flutes, you have valves, or you just cover the hole, depending on what type of flute we're talking about, or other wind instruments. Or we can also use wind to vibrate a reed, as in a saxophone. There's another side to that too. So wind causes movement, which can cause vibration. Okay, and then we have our stringed instruments, which we can take another bow. Imagine it again comes from a bow and arrow, and then we use a bow today on a violin. Well, that's still the same design. It just would have been two bows from two different bow and arrows without the arrows rubbing together, basically, one to resonate the other. So we can bow a string, we can pluck a string, and we can also hit stuff, pretty much. You can hit strings too. So that's a third thing you can do with strings, but you can also hit anything. So then you have your percussive sounds. And those, again, will emulate the heartbeat, that very primal part of where music ties into us. We need that rhythm, that's what gets us moving. Otherwise, it's just a note. Not that exciting. But what's great about it is that, again, we didn't make up the scales so much. We sort of did. We just said, hey, that sounds really cool. Because what happens in nature is one of the strongest intervals, aside from, hey, play that same note in another octave, is the power chord. The perfect fifth is something that is just in nature. We just found it. In fact, in a really weird way, all right, math time. Basically, it's a fraction of the actual note frequency. This happens to be, that happens to be 440. Your tuner, A equals 440, that's what that means. That equals this note. Okay, so if that's 440, that's 660, and that's 880, twice what the 440 was. That's all an octave is twice the vibration rate. We weren't doing this math. It just happened that way. Two people probably had different notes going at the same time and finally realized, hey, wow, that's really cool, and found their little power chord. So there's a lot of things that, we just ended up, again, we had so much time to figure it out. We're just wandering around dodging tigers and, and bears. So in our free time, when things were a little more calm, we were able to, jam out. Or maybe not, hey, right after the battle, if you survived and you got your bow and arrow, survival jam session. Thanks to the god of the cave bear or whatever for not eating the rest of us, And it became a ceremonial thing. And notice how music really has tied into ceremony forever, for as long as you go back. You even see early Greek mythology with lyres. Whatever the musical instrument of the time was, they were manipulating one of those little handful. Different kinds of winds, different kinds of string instruments, beating stuff up, banging on it. That's music. That's the very essentials, and we still have pretty much just those methods today. Well, now actually we have electronics too. Just one more way to generate vibrations, to oscillate them. So it's a language, though. I said earlier, music is a language. Your instrument is just one mechanical way. It's like a dialect of that language. The piano is one way to speak music. The guitar is another. The flute is another. The kazoo is another. There are a lot of different ways that you use the mechanics of the actual instrument itself to generate the music, which means that really before the stage of the player of the instrument, there is another stage before us. There's the design, the idea itself of the design of the instrument being able to do what it's designed to do in order to harness nature in one of that little handful of ways, in a way that makes sense according to the scales. Because when it comes back to it, the reason we want to be a musician is we need to be able to play with others, Otherwise, it's a very isolating thing, And there's a lot to be said for playing by yourself, It's you time, It's time for you. Have some you time. But you know what? All the really fun stuff is really a lot of the time when you get to work with other people and play music with them, and they speak some other dialect of language of music. So it's very much a real language. It's kind of a one-way language. I make a sound, and it controls the certain emotional quality of your imagination. So it's a one-way language, the same way that when I talk to you and you listen, you comprehend, and I make the sounds that make meaning. And this is a great language actually that spans all spoken languages. It doesn't matter what language you speak, because music will still affect you. If I play a very sad minor sounding thing, it's going to hit you the same way no matter where in the world you live, according to that particular aesthetic of whatever, you know, scales I'm using and whatever. At the same time, you know, you're able to actually chime in, just pick up an instrument, and then you have something to say as well. It's totally a language. So don't get caught up in the logic of your instrument so much that you don't learn how the other instruments work also. Not on a really basic surface level that anybody, I'm not talking about the taken for granted level that we all do that. I mean, as a musician, seek to kind of understand how would you approach music if that was your instrument. Think about a little bit more into how to play every instrument that you might ever like the sound of to accompany your instrument, because these are likely to be the types of musicians that you're going to work with. Now, a lot of the time when it comes to this, you know, since this has all been, you know, music theory has really just been something we're all finding here. We've written it down and secured it so that we don't forget it. We've named it weird stuff with ancient Greek names that most Locrian, flat, whatever, you know, and it doesn't mean anything to most people, but for the people that know what that means, it is very important, and it's documented and all that. But we're still finding this stuff out as we go. And for that reason, when you encounter musicians of all different sorts, they each will also have their own version of music theory. That's how they think about it. And since we're all really students forever, you know, you're always learning. You will always, the more you learn, the more you will find that you have room to learn more that you didn't know, and there's just so much, and it's great, and so keep feeding on. But at the same time, you know, there's also however many people that have an instrument that's that many different versions of music theory that you might possibly run into at some point. So the thing is, when you are working with other musicians, this is, I would assume, always had to have been the case. You have to sort of speak a language with them when you talk in music theory jargon that they can understand. So like, and this is, I've always been very comfortable with music theory, even though I didn't always bother with the names. But when I would use the names of the ones, like the modes that I did know, a lot of the time when I was speaking a language basically that no one understood because they didn't think like that, it was like, you know, button heads. And I've seen this happen in a lot of different bands. Not that I'm in necessarily, I just know that people all have their own conception of music theory. And if you're someone who happens to be struggling a little bit with your understanding of stuff, and then some dude in your band starts talking modes, and you're like, oh god, no, it might make you feel really insecure and really bring to the surface how you don't feel strong about it. But make an effort to try to speak the other person's language when you're talking to other musicians and when you're working with them, because they've got all they can have really right now, I mean, at their current capacity and everything they've been through, to use their instrument the way they do it. And sometimes some really interesting stuff comes out of not following the book. Sometimes you can, you know, if you're good at lateral thinking, you can take things that maybe don't even have anything to do with, like, you know, learning to play your instrument well, or learning to compose music just for all kinds of different instruments well. You might draw some inspiration from something that has nothing to do with that, and actually figure a way to make that help you. It's just such a huge part of life in general that causes me a great deal of joy, that I really want to share this with everybody that wants to actually enjoy making music, especially if you're somebody that's having a little bit of a hard time enjoying it right now, because it should be an enjoyable process. And there's a lot of stuff that can get in the way, especially with the standardized kind of musical language that's been developed around it. You know, it can be just plain frustrating to some people, and that's totally understandable, because I mean, if you open up a really complex but high quality book like the Guitar Grimoire, that's a great book. I love it. I recommend it to everybody in the world that plays a guitar, except you're probably going to keep it on a shelf for a lot of years, because there's so much in there, and it's all sort of abbreviated into symbols that are for words that you also don't know, and that you wouldn't know the meaning of, and it's mind-boggling when you're new to music theory and don't know what you're even looking at. It explains it extremely well to a person that has a certain understanding. But really, I mean, even reading through it is actually great, and it's a great systematized way of looking at just scales and the interval patterns that make them up. Because what we've been experimenting with these at least 42,000 years now are intervals, distances between notes, relative distances between the frequencies, and the way they kind of vibe with each other, the way that they sound when played at the same time. Anyway, I hope that I've given you some food for thought, and again, check out the links in the description for this video. I've provided a couple of the articles that can get you started. Just realizing how far back we've been dealing with this, and so if you're interested in history and prehistory and archaeology, beyond musical interest, this is actually a really fascinating thing to see. We're still using the same tools we've been using forever, and we still like it. The most common scale used still is the minor pentatonic scale. There are other scales that have been found in other flutes too, but it's just amazing. They're like, wow, that little has changed when it comes to that. We just like those melodies. We're just hardwired for some reason to like consonants more. So anyway, that's it for today. I'm Jason at Shred Mentor Rock Guitar Academy, and I'll see you next time. Rock on.